Share screen. Yep, you may start.
Hello everyone. I'm Takahiro Inoue from Hokkaido University, and thank you for having me for this forum today. And today I'm going to talk about climate change and forest as a carbon sink. And I think almost everyone knows that carbon dioxide concentration in the air has been increasing, and that's a major cause of global warming. But do you know how quickly it's been rising and what's the current level? So this figure shows the trend of CO2 concentration in the air from year 1000 to present. And I'm not showing the trend after the Industrial Revolution for now. So until the Industrial Revolution occurred in late 18th century, the atmospheric CO2 levels had been stable, and the value was about 280 ppm. But after the Industrial Revolution, it rose like this. And it was very quickly, and now the concentration of atmospheric CO2 is over 400 ppm. And to think about how to fix the global warming problem, I think it's important to understand how carbon behaves on Earth first. So I will explain the global carbon cycle for now. And in this figure, there are many arrows and circles. And arrows means the movement of carbon. And the numbers next to the arrows are the amount of carbon that moves. For example, in this thick arrows, it means 9.6 gigaton carbon is moved from the ground. And the circles in these figures represent the carbon stocks. But for today, I will talk about only the carbon movement. And there are two types of arrows in this figure. The thick ones represent the human emitted carbon. And the thin arrows are the movement of carbon in natural ecosystems. And about the the amount of carbon movement in natural ecosystems, for example, in terrestrial ecosystems, 130 gigaton carbon is moved from the air to the land every year. But the same amount of carbon is emitted to the atmosphere in the same year. Same applies to the marine ecosystems. The input and output are the same. So this means this movement of carbon doesn't affect the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere. Sorry, I forgot to show the pointer. Sorry, I was talking about these thin arrows and atmosphere. And about the human emitted carbon, which are shown in the thicker arrows, 9.6 gigaton carbon was emitted from the ground every year as a fossil fuel burning. And another 1.2 gigaton carbon is emitted to the air as through the land use chain, such as deforestation. However, the increase in the atmospheric CO2 is only 5.2 gigaton carbon every year. This is because the terrestrial ecosystem, marine ecosystem absorbs extra carbon every year. So these ecosystems plays very important role in the global carbon cycle. And here I will briefly explain the carbon cycle among atmosphere, vegetation, and soil. As you know, through photosynthesis, plants absorb CO2 from the air to produce organic matter. And organic matter that contains carbon is stored various places in the vegetation. Plants also does respiration, which emits CO2 back to the air. And after leaves, branches, and roots dies, the soil animals and soil microbes decompose these dead organic matters. And the carbon contained in these dead organic matters are respired to the air. But some carbon, which are resistant to decomposition, it remains on the ground and later incorporated into the soil. So the soil also plays an important role to store carbon. This figure also shows the importance of soil as a carbon sink. This figure shows the carbon storage in various terrestrial ecosystems, such as boreal forests, wetlands, and croplands. And the numbers in yellow-green colors shows the amount of carbon stored in the vegetation. And the numbers with dark green colors shows carbon stock in soils. So you can see in the soil, the amount of carbon stored is similar to vegetation or even larger. So far, I've been talking about the importance of terrestrial vegetation in carbon cycling and as a carbon sink. So people might want to ask a question like this: how does climate change affect the vegetation and the soil in terms of carbon cycling? So I will introduce some recent studies. According to the recent studies, the global photosynthesis, which is a carbon uptake by vegetation, has been increasing. And this figure is an example of a recent study that shows a trend of increasing photosynthesis. And the recent study also found that the reason of the increasing photosynthesis is the increasing CO2 level in the atmosphere. So this phenomenon is called the CO2 fertilization effect, because CO2 is acting like a fertilizer for the plants. The climate change also affects carbon emission from soil. This is another research, a different research that shows the trend of respiration by roots, microbes, and animals in soil through the year. You can see the increasing trends of soil respiration. And the reason for this hasn't been understood clearly, but it's believed that the global warming, the warming temperature is the reason, because the soil microbial activities become more active in the warmer conditions. So I've just shown that the photosynthesis and the soil emission respiration has been increasing, but so far the increase in photosynthesis is larger than the soil respiration. So the net carbon sink is happening, but we don't know if this continues until the future. And as I explained, the terrestrial vegetation is important as a carbon sink. And the forest is an important component in the terrestrial vegetation. So from now on, I will explain the current state of global forest. Unfortunately, the global forest area has been decreasing, like this figure shows. And this map shows where the deforestation is happening in the world. Actually, this map shows the annual net forest gain or loss by country between the 1990 and 2015. And the countries with the green colors show the net gain. And countries with the red colors lost forest during this period. And the darker color shows larger gain or loss of forest. You can see the countries with dark red colors are concentrated around the equator, where the major forest type is a tropical forest. And when deforestation happens, carbon uptake by vegetation is, of course, will be lost. But not only that, the carbon stored in the vegetation will be emitted to the burning or natural decomposition. So it's a large impact on the carbon cycling. And this figure shows what drives the deforestation in a tropical forest. Each column shows either country or region of the area where the tropical forests are. And the vertical axis shows the drivers of deforestation. And from the left, Brazil and Latin American countries, the dominant driver of deforestation is cattle meat production, beef production. That means forests are cleared to make pasture to raise cattle. However, for the Asian Pacific countries, the driver is different. The major drivers for the deforestation is oilseed production, mainly oil palm. So for these countries, the forests are cleared to make palm oil plantation, oil palm plantation. And as I said, for Brazil, the most dominant driver of deforestation is beef production. But not all the beef produced in Brazil is consumed locally. Actually, Brazil is the largest beef exporter in the world. And similar thing applies to the oil palm plantation. Palm oil is a very useful vegetable oil. So that is used in various products such as chocolate, margarine, and even shampoos. So a lot of palm oil is exported from the Asian Pacific countries. So these world trade in these products means overseas demands are also responsible for the tropical forest loss and associated carbon dioxide emission. So I think I might talk too fast, but this is the last slide and the take-home message of my presentation. So yeah, today I talked about the terrestrial vegetation and the soil are important carbon storage. And the photosynthesis and the soil respiration are increasing due to the increase in CO2 level and rising temperature. And finally, I'd like to say that overseas demands are also responsible for the tropical forest loss and associated CO2 emission. So I think the customers should pay not only should pay attention not only to the price of the products, but also where it came from and what's in it. Yep, that's all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Inoue Sensei. So we will hold all kind of questions and comments until after all the presentations are done. So if you have a question, please wait until that. So again, we're kind of behind on the time, so we will move on. So now I would like to welcome Dr. Tetsuya Aikoh. He's Associate Professor at the Graduate School of Agriculture, also at Hokkaido University. And he's going to give a presentation on the recreational impact and carrying capacity in protected areas. So let me just find desktop. This one, right? This one? Yes. Yeah. Sure. Here and on Zoom, we will share. This one. Okay. 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 Please.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Tetsuya Aikoh. I'm an associate professor from the research faculty of agriculture, Hokkaido University. So I'm talking about the title recreational impacts and the carrying capacity in protected areas. And actually, so I'm teaching landscape architecture, landscape planning and management of parks and protected areas in our faculty. And I'm in charge of the World Commission on Protected Areas of IUCN, and also some academic conference and academic community, international community. And also I'm in charge of management of Schut World Natural Heritage Site and also the Daisatsu National Park. So today I show you some example of these impacts in some national parks in Japan, and also I show you some case studies how to deal with such problems based on my experience. This is my photo, and sometimes I joining the trail maintenance activities with the students, so with some hikers in Daisatsu. And now we have 34 national parks in Japan, and we have 5 World Natural Heritage Sites. So Mount Fuji is not the natural heritage, it's a cultural heritage site. And we have many beautiful protected areas and national parks. But there are several and many problems about impacts, and also we have some impacts from the climate change, vegetation change, and also that we have many typhoons, etc. And these beautiful landscapes attracts visitors, but too many visitors causes several impacts on the environmental and also visitors' psychological aspects. So this slide shows you the example of the recreational impacts in protected areas. So this includes soil erosion on trails and vegetation losses at campsite or around the trails, and disturbances of wildlife habitat and water pollution by the human waste or the garbage, And some visitors may introduce the seed or some exotic species, invasive species to the natural areas. And also too many visitors affect the visitors' experience. So visitors expect to recreate and to be relaxed in some parks and protected areas. But to many people's causes the crowding perceptions, and it may affect the dissatisfaction by visitors. And it might cause their displacement of such places, and this will impact the local economy through the decrease of the tourist and change their mind and their brand image of such areas. And I'll show you some example. Do you know where is this? Can you imagine where is this? It's a Mount Fuji. So I took this picture in the middle of the summer. And at the Mount Fuji, so hiking, climbing period is very short from the beginning of the July to the end of August. It's only 2 months during the year, but there are too many people hiking there, and it's not like hiking, it's like just lining up in front of the shops or crowding popular restaurants. And but in this area, you can see many type of backpack there, and also they are trying to climb the mountains to see the sunrise at dawn from the summit. And traditionally, playing the sunrise from the shrine at the summit is a traditional hiking culture from the Edo era. It's one reason of why this place is registered as a World Cultural Heritage Site. But too many people causes problems to crowded, and they erode trails, and many litters and garbage, and also the toilet is a problem. And next slide is and people walk, they tramp the vegetation and the soil. I took this picture at the northernmost national park, Rishiri Levin Sarobetsu National Park. At the Mount Rishiri, climates eroded this fragile volcanic soil, and at almost 3 meters depth. And the number of people who walk on the path is one factor to erode the soil, but also the fragile volcanic soil is also the reason of this impact. And the next one is from the Daisetsuzan National Park. This is a mulch-lined trails. Initially, hikers walk the center of this area, but it eroded and compacted the soil by hikers, and it gathered the waters from surroundings, and it eroded after the heavy rainfall or after the melting snow. And during the summer season, after the rainfall, it muddy. It's becoming muddy by the rain, and hikers don't want to walk there, and they tramped along the trail, and they widen the bare ground like this. And this one is an aerial view of a campsite at Daisetsuzan National Park. During the almost 30 years, since 1970. The amount of bearing that looks a white area as a campsite enlarged. And you can see small narrow paths around each campsite spread around the campsite. What do you think these trails, small trails are? So can you imagine? So if you can go to the end of this narrow path, you can find these views. So its narrow path is made by the hikers for toilet. So there are no toilet facilities in that campsite, and hikers go to these areas, and they just left their things and also papers. Yeah, that's a very big problem in some areas, like such campsite without toilet facilities. And this one is, I'll show you some conflict with wild animals and visitors. You can see small squirrels here. I took this photo in Sapporo City, the center of Sapporo City. There is Maruyama. It's not a national park. It's a natural monument, and but there are many squirrels and small birds. But these visitors feed such wild animals and tamed them, and it attracts many visitors therefore. And the next example is from the Ogasawara Island. It's a remote island, subtropical island in Tokyo Prefecture. It's about 23 hours ship ride from Tokyo Bay. And you can see you can experience subtropical areas like this. But in these areas, invasive plants and invasive animals is big problem. And if you want to go the hikes, and you should clean up your shoes to remove the soils and the seeds. If you may transfer seeds or the eggs of the small bugs. And also old residents imported some goats and cats, and they also introduced some reptiles. It will affect the existing habitats of flora and fauna. And I will introduce one concept of the recreational carrying capacity. It's originally from the ranch management. So if you have one cow in ranch, and it's okay, and two is still okay. But if you have too many cows in small areas, if the speed of the cattle eating exceeds the speed of grass production, it may cause such bare grounds. And the recreational carrying capacity was defined as the maximum number of people that may visit the protected areas at the same time without causing disruption of the physical, economic, and socio-cultural environment, and an acceptable decrease in the quality of visitor satisfactions. And there are many studies do that, and to find the carrying capacity and the appropriate level of the visitors in protected areas. But it was not so easy. It is difficult. So originally we thought that if the use level increase, also the impact increases linearly. But actually, so actual condition is not so easy. That's very complex. So the cause and factors to affect the impact is very various, and it's very difficult to find like this. So there are many patterns of the to estimate the number of peoples to are in the protected areas. And I'm sorry, this slide is not good quality, but there are many strategies and then there are many measures to deal with such type of impact. And one option is increase the durability or increase resilience of that site, like make wooden trail on the soil trail, or make a white and put a toilet facility in the campsite. And also the limit or restricting such type of use or the number of visitors is one option, but it's not welcomed by the local communities because they may lose their tourism incomes by that. And it is very difficult to make agreement with local communities. Yeah, and I'll show you some example from Mount Fuji. And Mount Fuji is first, they asked hikers to escape and to avoid the crowded time and also the crowded days. And they announced the crowding forecast calendar and also the site and the places and the routes. And they ask visitors to escape the crowded areas and the times. But based on our research, only less than 30% of people are aware of such type of information. And also only the less than 5% of people changed their behavior. So that's a problem. So now we and Yamanashi and Shizuoka Prefecture park managers are trying to distribute such information and to change visitors' behaviors. And the next example from the Shiretoko National Park, you can see, have you ever been to the Shiretoko National Park before? It's a very beautiful and very famous for the most, I think it's the most crowded brown bear habitat in Northern Hemisphere. And but many conflict with visitors by brown bears, but it's very dangerous. And also the traffic jam, we call, in Shiretoko, we call it the bear jam. It's not a real bear jam. It's not a jam made from the bear meat. No, so it's a traffic jam. The cars and the visitors want to see bear and want to take pictures and want to take movies. And then, so now we are trying to change their travel mode from their private car to the shuttle bus. And we want to extend the shuttle bus sections, and we distributed this type of cards so you can see the distance from the wild animals. We asked them to, if you want to see the bears or deers, they have to take the appropriate distance, 30 meters or 50 meters. More than 50 meters is safety enough, I think, we think, yeah. And the next example is from the Daishizen National Park. To deal with trail disruptions, the local stakeholders and park managers and also scientists like me joined such conferences, and we periodically have the meeting how to fix and how to repair the trails and such type of old broken trails. And many people, hikers and visitors joined this project, and the government asked citizens together to collect the money. So last 2 years, we collected 5 million yen. Just last week, we used these monies and to fix and to protect the vegetation and to replace the new wooden trails like this. Okay, And I finalize my presentation, and towards the promotion of appropriate use, establishment goals is important. Also, the monitoring data and the assessment is not enough, and also the cross-sectoral organization needs such type of management bodies. And we have to predict the impact to tourism and local economies at the same time. And I think it's a most important thing is a meeting and communication for the exchange of opinions among variety of stakeholders, including visitors. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eiko-sensei. Again, if we could leave all questions and comments till the open discussion at the end. So, did we stop sharing? Okay. Back to Zoom. Okay. Okay. So again, moving on to our next speaker. We're very lucky to be joined in Japan by Dr. Carol Osborne. Carol is a researcher developer at the University of Huddersfield, and she's going to give a talk today on reflections on the relationship between mountaineering and climbing and the environment. So, yeah, Carol, if you want to make your way over here. Yeah, you can just sit.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. No PowerPoint from me today. So just some reflections on mountaineering and climbing in the environment. And these reflections are coming from discussions that we had yesterday in the Hokkaido Summer Institute. It was helpful to me to hear the postgraduates' responses to issues raised during Professor Ikeda's presentation and my own presentation yesterday, and also their choices of content from the 2022 Greening Sport Roundtable proceedings, which was used for discussion. So I thank Professor Ikeda for her commitment to producing the publication, because so often these kinds of discussions and the ideas that are made in these discussions, they disappear. So it's a really good publication. So this contribution, as I said, builds on the discussion that we began to have during the first day of the Institute about the slippery conceptual territory of sport, games and play, and how these terms are fluid within and between activities. I recognise that there is a literature in the applied philosophy of sport which deals with these questions. But as we might expect, answers to the question, what is sport, often raises more questions rather than providing strong answers. Now, so I claim some responsibility for taking us down that path, because I asked yesterday the question, is mountaineering a sport? Okay. Some participants said yes, others said they did not think so. It's not an easy question to answer, but it reminds us that different perspectives exist on the same kinds of questions, and that matters for us. Now, for the purposes of a greening sport programme, the inclusion of a pursuit like mountaineering is typically unquestioned. It seems to fit. Yet, the ways activities are defined by outsiders and insiders can have implications for where responsibilities are seen to lay, and more critically, the means of finding and acting on solutions that might be needed in the environment. For example, on questions of ethical behaviour in the mountains and their surroundings. Certainly, when it comes to solutions related to conservation and preservation, national and international governing bodies must turn to the worldwide climbing communities who possibly take for granted their freedom to climb, whether that climbing is on their local crags or on high mountain ranges all over the world. Climbers value their autonomy and are unlikely to be easily persuaded to accept restrictions on their activities. An important point raised by students yesterday is that solutions to the damages done to mountains themselves should be co-produced by working with researchers, with communities themselves, and also climbers. So those solutions must be found what we call in situ, in the place where they are happening. But of course, many of the climbers and the local communities and the climbing activities is entangled with local economies, which are now dependent on associated income generation, which Dr. Aikoh has just mentioned, the dependency on economy. So, for example, from revenue from permits to climb mountains, in thinking about Mount Everest, the employment of Sherpas on expeditions, and the provisions of goods and of services. Now, Mount Everest and the Khumbu region of Nepal is an obvious example for questioning the wisdom of issuing too many permits to make a sense. But Everest is not alone in drawing crowds of mountaineers. Mont Blanc, the tallest mountain in the Alps of Western Europe, recently made news in the UK due to the proposal for a possible permit designed to restrict tourist pressure. The area of Mont Blanc Massif has also been identified with the impact of climate change due to increased glacier melt. Climate change, of course, being a wider problem for our planet. This brings into focus the question of what to climb. If restrictions by payment or closure in season are decided for popular mountain destinations, then obviously climbers will find alternative places to go. And there are plenty of mountains in the world, the wider Alps, other mountains in the Himalayas and the Karakoram, the Andes, the Rockies, the Atlas mountain ranges, to name a few. But again, the problems associated with pressure on surrounding communities, their resources, and the mountain landscape, because of rubbish being thrown, because of erosion, and the carbon footprint from travel, all of these things are repeated in new mountain environments if climbers go elsewhere. Now, the appeal of some mountains over others usually relates to the height, the challenge, and iconic status. This is what brings tourists, especially, to mountains. So these mountains need judicious management for conservation. But whilst the balance is in favour of economics, conservation of popular climbing destinations is essential to ensure tourist mountaineer engagement. Now, interestingly, nature itself provides its own protection through the seasons. As is the case with Mount Fuji, the season is restricted. But this is so interesting, what Professor Aikoh said, because clearly, even with a restricted season, the mountain still suffers much damage. So this is interesting, very interesting. So yeah, yesterday I was precise in my term mountaineering. Okay, broadly a practice that is grounded in mountain ascents over mixed terrain of rock, snow, ice. But as you probably know, the term climbing is often used interchangeably with mountaineering, and that too can complicate conservation in terms of responsible use of the environment. Climbing is a generic concept which captures a range of distinctive activities dependent on a wide variety of natural rock formations that are found all over the world. And this produces different kinds of practitioners in climbing, disciplines and styles. For example, bouldering, crag climbing, big wall climbing, coasteering, which is climbing along the rocks along the sea. Okay, so all of these different types of climbing. Now, how climbers interpret their participation, either as play, games, or sport, or even recreation, or even leisure, you know, the way that the climbers define their activity is important for sense making around these pursuits. This is because what they climb and how serious they are about participation can influence their idea of rights to access climbing playgrounds, rather than recognizing that doing so is a negotiable human want, not necessarily a need. It's a human want to climb. And so we should be thinking that the welfare of nature should always take priority. Even with climbing change prominent in the media, we live in a self-interested time. And with the rising popularity of indoor climbing walls, it is likely that there will be more people going to the outside to practice their skills. It is essential to say that we cannot assume that climbers care about the conceptualization that academics do, people like me. The priority of the climbers that I have met is to get out on the hill or get out on the crag and do some climbing. Equally, we cannot assume that because the sport someone chooses is in the outdoors, so by definition can be green, we cannot assume that they care about their environment because they want to do the activity. Okay, so why would climbers become activists if it threatens their freedom to choose where and how to climb? Even so, cultural insiders, people who climb, are essential for promoting green thinking, but in doing so, they can risk being unpopular within the subculture because others do not want to compromise. So just moving towards my final reflections, I want to think about what is it about embodied sporting experiences in and with nature that compels individuals to return again and again to the outdoors. And I think we need to think about this. Why do people keep going to these places that are much used? Okay, well, the benefits are unique to each individual, but we can be certain that engaging with the physical features of the outdoors, whether that's land, water, or air, yields a range of sensations. Yesterday, we spoke about the sense of fear, which can be evoked when engaging with a domain that is so much bigger than we are. And it is also one which gives us unpredictable conditions. Now, the unpredictable conditions for climbers is integral to their experience, even in situations where risk is high and even life-threatening. To know about the possible dangers in this pursuit guarantees that even repeated visits to the same places, the same rocks, the same mountains are never the same. So it is always a new experience. The frisson, the feeling associated with being caught in a weather event, so high winds, heavy rain, extreme heat, or being gripped, that's frozen on the mountain, in a hold on the mountain, where it is technically difficult to move, produces distinctive bodily reactions. For example, uncontrollable leg shaking, goosebumps, sweats, shudders, nauseousness, all temporary, all manageable, but critically, all memorable as body sensations for the climber. Otherwise, rock climbing in an outdoor arena without spectators, whether on short crags or tall climbing walls, taps into the body's abilities of proprioception. Okay, and proprioception, that is our innate ability to adapt a repertoire of movements in response to the objects and open spaces in front of us. This represents an incredible synergy between body and mind. Body first, then mind, okay? Which, in turn, because of this terrain, it heightens sensory receptors in the skin through touch on the rock, the muscles and joints that are being flexed and dynamically moved through a range of delicate, strong, and dynamic movements. So this is the feeling, the experience that is drawing people to this pursuit. So finally, choosing to climb is above all else an active choice to be in or with nature. It's a means of experiencing an intensity of feeling which cannot be attained in man-made environments. Choosing to climb on an artificial climbing wall indoors is therefore also an active choice not to engage with nature. Rather, it is a choice to engage with a vertical artificial challenge, and it represents a determination to, yes, test oneself, but also to instrumentally train the body, as in a gym, for example. It is training that does not necessarily progress to a choice to climb outdoors, but arguably this indoor practice is more sustainable because a wall can be locally accessed, and unlike the damages and erosion on rock, the artificial wall is simply replaceable at the end of its life. And that's...
Thank you, Carol. So that concludes our on-site lectures from those who are here with us in Japan, Hokkaido, Japan. So now I would like to move on to our overseas lecturers joining us online. So our next lecturer is Dr. Pierre-Olaf Schut. He's professor at the Universite Gustave Eiffel in France. And we are immensely grateful for the support and contribution that Pierre-Olaf has had towards this greening sport project, not only in his role as the project's coordinator, but also as ISHBES president. So his topic is outdoor sports and the environment, balancing accessibility and sustainability. Pierre-Olaf, when you are ready, you may begin.
Okay, can you hear me correctly?
Yes.
Okay, I will share my slides.
Yeah.
It works. Okay.
Yes.
When I change the slide, it works also.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you, Dale, to invite me, and thank you also Professor Keiko Ikeda, who manage and this forum and all the project supported by XP. My presentation in this forum will be probably complementary with the others and the first one, because I want to speak about outdoor sports, of course, and environment. And I really appreciate the interdisciplinary approach that we had in this discussion. So this presentation is also dedicated to raise some question and with a more historical aspect, because I'm a sport historian, and I worked a lot on outdoors, especially on speleology, ski, alpinism, and I want to raise some question, because we have this nowadays question challenge about environment, carbon footprint, and so on, and we have sometimes some things which are quite evident, like transportation is increasing carbon footprint and so on. So I want to raise some question just to think about what is the meaning of nature, environment, especially with the sports perspective, and how it changed depending of the context and depending of the time period. So that's why history could help in this context. So firstly, I want to speak about outdoor sports. So Carol said that indoor rock climbing is not really an outdoor sport because there is no nature. Of course, it's better for sustainability, but I want to focus only on outdoor, so sports which are organized and played in the natural environment. And I will take some example in different physical activities. And I will just start with this quite simple contradiction that we want to have these physical activities in nature, because it's fundamentally the nature of outdoor sports. But when we go in this nature, we pollute, erode the nature. And when we have this disagreement of nature, we in the same times we are going in the end of this what we can do outside. And I'd like the discussion with Professor Tetsuya Aikoh, who clearly show that we need to balance the use and the preservation by finding the good number of people who are allowed to go in the nature. So this also raised some question about the ethic of these physical activities, which are really close to the wish of enjoy a liberty to go everywhere in the nature. So this is the first question, and my approach is as an historian, I will take different example, and because when I said to you that I work on different physical activities in different periods in the 19th and 20th centuries, I will give you some example, historical example, or something more recent. But I try to go back to these archives and raise some new question because of this environmental issue, which was not at the which are not my main question when I worked firstly on these archives. So I try to raise some new question and think about this challenge of preserving environment and nature by the history of physical activities. So I work especially on speleology. So I have some example about caving, but also in other activities. But most of them are French, because I'm French, of course, and I work on the French context. But I think it will help in this transnational approach to balance with the presentation from the other speakers. So my first question is what kind of environment we want to preserve. And so you can easily see the paintings from a parietal cave in France, and these paintings are human marks on the rocks. So the real nature in this cave is the rocks. But what we want to preserve, I think you all agree with me, is the paintings, because it's paintings from 30,000 years before our era. So it's very important for the archaeologists or the history. So we want to preserve paintings, and we don't care about nature in this case. And it's a speleologist who found these caves, but when they opened the caves, the climate of the cave changed because there is more air to go inside the cave. And if we wait in this condition, the paintings will disappear in few decades, which of course it's a pity for archaeologists and history. So at this time they decide, and it's the same in other locations in France, to close the cave. So they built a door, and because it's very important and it's very interesting to have these very old paintings, they decide to create an artificial new cave that you can see on the picture on the right. This is from outside. This is the building from outside, created and dedicated to this artificial cave that they create in the indoor, and you can visit this. It's not a cave, of course, it's just a building, but inside they create and reproduce exactly the same painting as you can find in the real cave. So this is the contradiction, because we want to the preservation is important, but what exactly we want to preserve? Do we want to preserve the human use or human marks in the nature? Or do we want to preserve the nature? Because in this case, we close a cave, a natural cave. We create a building in a green area, a very big building in concrete, which is, of course, not exactly the forest. So the question is, what is important? What we said about environment and what is important to preserve? Is it the human marks or the nature by itself? And another example that I like especially, it's this is a part of the French Alps, and I want to go back to the early years of the 20th century. At this time in the United States, we have the first national parks. The Yellowstone was the first, and after others. And in Europe, they think about this idea, and they really appreciate this idea of preserving nature by creating national parks. So in France, after some lobbying and articles in the media, especially in the media of the outdoor, in the Alpine Club journal and so on, they decided to create the first national park. So in an area just in the south of Grenoble, in the Alps. And it was mainly a private initiative, and they decide to buy or rent a really important part of the field, and to create this first national park, which was quite small in comparison to United States ones. But what is important is the motivation. So it was mainly alpinists who give money for this action, but they want to do this especially to fight against ships. Yes, it looks crazy now, but because at this time, this small area, because everything, there is a very large area, but snow covered 9 months per year. So the only way of incomes for the small village is to rent the valley to the ship's owner, and they come in the summer with the thousands of sheep, but the sheep eat everything. So they eat the grass, they eat the small trees and vegetation. And what the view or the idea of preserving the mountains at these times is, we want to keep vegetation, because if we don't have vegetation, with the rain and the snow, we will have some landslides and some problem with the field and the ground. So we need vegetation. So if we need vegetation, we need to put ships away. So at this time, and it's completely the inverse situation today, they buy the land, they rent a part of the land to create a national park, with the first aim was to put out the ships and to forbid the access for the ships during the summer, just to preserve vegetation and to avoid landslides and so on. So today, of course, we have the opposite situation. We have less ships, but they try to reintroduce ships in mountain, and because it's better to have some quite an extensive I don't have the English word, but an extensive good condition for ships, and not to put every ships in a building and just eat them and just feed them in a closed area. So this is, of course, you can say that it's very different. We have the same wish to have the preservation of the mountains, but in one hand, well, 1 century before, it was because we can put away the ships, and now because we introduce the ships. So that's important to understand that in different time period, we have different expectation or wish or to change the things. Another, and it will be the last example in speleology and caves and the access to caves. You can see in the picture, it looks like a jail, but it's not a jail. It's just because in different caves we have some springs, and springs is used for the water collection for the cities. And so, of course, you don't want to have somebody who work in the water that you want to drink after. So the question is what we expect about the nature. Do we keep the nature for human uses? And it could be for physical activities, but it could be also for the water collection. And in this case, we have the water collection is the most important. So we the jail, the door is just to forbid the access for speleology, because they don't want them to pollute the water that you can use in the city, just in the valley. Now we have also, of course, we expect a lot about access to sports area. And in the public policies in France, we have this effort to keep the access to sports areas. So they make an inventory of sites for outdoor sports in general. So rock climbing, hiking, kayaking, and other sports. And they try to preserve this area. So that's why if tomorrow they make a restricted area for natural preservation, they have to keep the sports sites, and they have to keep the access or to plan the parks to the sports sites. So it's very important for outdoor sports, because we can preserve our sites and our possibility to practice. But in the same way, we can see that there are some contradictions sometimes between environmental preservation and physical activity preservation. So they try to combine them to make some arrangement. But of course, it's not always clear that what we do for sports is what is the good things for environment, and sometimes we have to make some arrangements. So we try to keep in time and go faster to the end. We need to really think about what we want and what are possibly the problems. For example, in the picture, the sharks is in the ocean, and I think it's the good place for a shark, but of course it's not really good for surfers. In the other side, I don't speak much more about Mont Blanc and over frequentation of Mont Blanc, because Carol said some things about, but we have also the conflict between sports, because if you make cross-country skiing you have different style, and if we practice one style, it's not really easy to manage the workers or people who practice with the other styles. So what are the problems? The sharks, or the other sportsmen, or the different uses of sports sites. So we need to think about that, and the answers are probably different depending of the country and the context. So of course we have some cleaning operation, and just to conclude, because I start to become late. So we have the outdoor sports are very important for us, but the success of the outdoor sports are also the problems, and raise some problems about environmental problems. And we have this complex situation in the sense of Edgar Morin, which is some contradiction between the success of those sports and the wish to preserve nature and the quality of the sites when we are training or practicing. And I try to show in this short presentation that we need to think really deeply in the problem. It's not really easy to manage what is the problem, and sometimes the challenges, the issues, the solutions could be different in a different regional context, but also in a different cultural context, and the change in history can show it quite clearly. I hope so. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pierre-Olaf. Again, for anyone who's just recently joined us, we are running about 20 minutes behind. So without further ado, I will move on to our next speaker. So our next speaker is Dr. Tom Fabian. He is a lecturer in sports management at University College Dublin, as well as being an important collaborator on the Greening Sport project that we're doing. He will give a presentation on Indigenous knowledge, ecological sensibilities, and nature games in Oceania. Tom, are you ready? Okay.
I am. Oh, I think I should do this for this one. One sec. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen here. So I have the ability to do that. Great. And I think that should be good, yeah?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Tom Fabian. Thank you so much for having me back this year, Keiko. I can't see you, I apologize, but hello. Today I'm going to be actually continuing a little bit of my talk from last year about nature games. So today I'm going to be talking about Indigenous knowledge, ecological sensibilities, and nature games in Oceania. And this is based on a project that I was working on at the University of Queensland in Australia over the last year, where I was doing a postdoctoral fellowship, which was funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, as well as an IXP grant, which the whole Greening Sport sort of foundation is based on. All right, let's get into it because we only have so much time. So playing in nature. So I'm of the opinion that developing an environmental stewardship is a societal shift that is crucial to climate action. So basically, caring about nature matters. So what is an ecological sensibility? It is basically the same thing as this developing a stewardship or a sense for ecologies, which is actually referring to the advancement of an eco-literacy that transcends our anthropocentrism. So basically thinking more about nature outside of humanity. And some examples of this include Japanese Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, Norwegian friluftsliv, which is an outdoor living philosophy, or the forest school movement, all of which are indicative of a global web of green living proponents in our post-pandemic world. So learning about the connection to place and space, be it green spaces or blue spaces, can potentially lead to deeper reflections, connections, understandings about how our relationship to place, green spaces or blue spaces, are contingent on both our current and our future environmental justice. And this is both generational, but also intergenerational. So how do we care about our environment for future generations as well? So caring about place actually matters. One aspect of green living that is not often considered, however, is the importance of playing in nature. So the aim of my project is to situate traditional indigenous games at the point at which environmental stewardship, or this ecological sensibility, meets physical culture, games, sports, that kind of stuff. First off, though, let's quickly talk about what Oceania is. It's a really big area. I didn't go to all of it, but I did happen to be in Australia, in Brisbane, which is in Queensland in particular, and as well as Fiji and in New Zealand, or Aotearoa, which is what the Maori people call it. And in New Zealand, I had a wonderful opportunity to do work with Harco Brown, who is an expert in Maori traditional games, and I'll get to his work in a little bit. But Oceania is divided into 4 major groups. That's Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, which is very big, and Australasia, which includes Australia and New Zealand. And as you can tell, there's an expansive diversity of customs and languages and ecologies in this area. So there are the deserts of Central Australia, there are the lush rainforests of Papua New Guinea, there are the various coral atolls of all these Polynesian islands or Melanesian islands or what have you. And so it's really difficult to define this region. And as Brian Sutton-Smith, a New Zealand play theorist, said, it also has a lot of different folk phenomena, including traditional games. And as you can imagine, the various weather patterns and different climates will affect the evolution and development of different games in this region. And so what are traditional games? I think that's probably really important to note. So they are, I see them, or I define them as local, cultural, and marginal games played all over the world. They're often children's games, they're often in rural settings, and they're often linked to ethnic identity creation and maintenance. So they're quite important in that sense. They're also often considered nature games, as they are played outdoors in natural settings and using natural materials for equipment. And before I go any further, I do want to make a couple of acknowledgements, because the focus of my work is the connections between land, sea, and culture, in this case, games. In Indigenous societies, I'd like to acknowledge that the oppressive history of settler colonialism in wider Oceania, I think it's very important. I want to acknowledge the centrality of land and sea in Indigenous cultures and spirituality, as Nunukal poet, artist, activist, and conservationist Kath Walker, who I recommend you look up, wrote, "No Aborigine can own the land because the land owns us." I really like that. I think it helps us fully understand that. And I also want to acknowledge that indigeneity does not beget environmentalism, i.e., Indigenous peoples are not necessarily environmentalists, and that's really important to put out there. And that's where the term "black is not green" comes from. Black people are the Aboriginal people of Australia, and so that term actually comes from there. Black is not green, and specifically, Indigenous peoples are not environmentalists in a very Western sense of what environmentalism is. That said, there's still much we can learn from nature, about nature, and with nature by understanding Indigenous nature play and games. I did want to talk a little bit about nature-based Indigenous knowledge systems. So the main one here is caring for country. I think some of you might have heard this. This is an Aboriginal term from Australia that is basically about looking after where you come from. And I love this quote from Balang Lewis, who is an actor and elder. And I saw this in a documentary the other day, which is really great. "You lot have your temples and cathedrals. Nature is our church. Our most important rule is to look after the land. It's a gift to you and me. We don't own it. We belong to it." Another concept in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is Kaitai Tia Kitanga. It's a mouthful, but it means stewardship. And in particular, it is found fundamental to Maori environmentalism, and it recognizes both the reliance on nature for survival, sustenance, and spirituality, but also the responsibility to care for nature for the nourishment of future generations. In Fiji, for instance, all that comes from the land, including humans, is one entity. This comprehensive, ecologically sensible concept of man and resource interdependence is implicit in the term vanua. And then another example in Melanesia is with the Binandera people of Papua New Guinea. They have a belief system known as Sinanambari, which translates as being, and it views people as in reaction to their natural surroundings. And these are just a couple of indigenous epistemologies or knowledge systems about nature. And I wanted to put that out there because, as you can tell, a lot of them are very similar, but each diverse part of Oceania has different ideas about nature and worldviews about nature that I think are important to take into consideration before we get going into some of the nuance here. So nature sports, outdoor recreation, and nature-based extreme sports are often situated within broader narratives of green spaces and blue spaces. Participating in such activities creates what Gregory Bateson, an anthropologist, referred to as play frame, where bodily movement becomes intertwined with natural environment. So that's the idea of embodiment there. Philosopher Kevin Krein keeps going on with this and says that games played in nature can create new and original frameworks that can help us to better comprehend our relationships with the natural world. Barbara Humberstone, who is integral to this whole conversation about play in nature, said that the very fluidity of movement through nature brings forth continuously changing perceptions and awareness. Whoops. Sharma, Breyer, Gray, and Breimer wrote that outdoor activities and traditional games are ideal activities for facilitating an acceptance that humans are part of the environment, promoting the environment over the tasks, sponsoring respect for the environment, that's that stewardship or ecological sensibility that we were talking about, and cultivating a deeper environmental activity. And finally, Van Renen and Mello, like extreme alternative nature sports, traditional games and outdoor activities in general can be understood as countercultural practices, which promise the possibility of systemic sustainability as participants redefine sport in terms of relational equity and eco-literacy. So this taps into the idea of environmental justice as well as eco-literacy or understanding nature, again, through activities and games. So let's talk a little bit about some of these games, not in anything particular, but one thing that I noticed when I was trying to understand all the different games and types of games in Oceania is that many games are based on survival and learning about how to survive on the land, and kids who are learning that learn it through gameplay, and a lot of it is through mimicry and song. So when you're playing as a child, you'll be taught a song, and that song will teach you about the land, but also teach you about the task. And the song is usually sung while playing games. So I thought that was very interesting. Mimicry is also really, really important in a lot of these cultures. So for instance, Cat's Cradle, which many of you might have heard of, is these different string games, like that picture there. And you show different images, and with each image, there's a story, and you're trying to mimic different symbols within nature. There are sand games throughout Central Australia and the desert, for instance. Fire games are really important. And this is really interesting. So because fire is an integral part of everyday life in Central Australia, for instance, children learn from an early age to understand, control, and exploit fire in games. So you'll have 3-year-olds running around with sticks of fire, whereas in a lot of Western cultures, that would be a big faux pas. We do not do that. Smoke games, in addition, the Kalkatungu people of Queensland play a game called Pirijarongo, where they have these huge bonfires, and they actually throw mussel shells into the smoke to see how it moves in a very natural way, and they mimic that movement through dance. Rock games are very popular. You have top spinning in the Torres Strait Islands. Those are the islands between Papua New Guinea and Australia. Huge rocks that they actually carve down to a point, and they do the top spinning games. A game that I really liked when I was in New Zealand is Amu Turore, which is basically, it's like a board game, but you just use different colored rocks and you have to move them in and out. And you have different types of plant games. As you can imagine, different shaped seeds are used as helicopters or tops or marbles. You have thatched balls, so balls that are made out of thatching together long leaves. You have sticks for fighting, etc., etc. But one of my favorite of the plant games is the vine game. And specifically in Vanuatu, they have this ritualistic land diving, which is the precursor to the modern bungee jumping craze. So I thought that would be kind of interesting to toss in there. But just to give you an example of different types of games and how you can learn about nature through these different types of games. There's also blue spaces. I'm not going to read through those quotes, but there's some great quotes about what the sea means to people in Oceania, or people of the ocean. But traditional water games are part and parcel to greater ocean ecology and include, open water swimming, traditional diving like koku in the Solomon Islands, boating, fishing, surfing, and other water-based games that teach children about the tides, sea life, and weather patterns. My favorite, though, that I want to talk about and I learned from Harco Brown about is the Mara Hupara. These are Maori playgrounds, and these nature playgrounds are sites of natural play with natural materials that allow for Maori to reconcile their relationship with the environment. And here's a description from Harco. The Mara Hupara, or apparatus gardens, are collective of traditional, predominantly wood-based play implements that are permanently dug, stacked, or hung in place. They include tree logs, stumps, posts, vines, and are widely used in these cultural enclaves. The hupara is a commonly acknowledged umbrella term for an array of over 30 artifacts, from very long logs to that would be erected in village plazas, to ones that were used as bridges, as swings, as sacred totems, and as honorary pou. So Harco Brown actually works as a consultant and builds these playgrounds throughout New Zealand, but is actually being consulted in other places like Australia, and I might be using him in the future, and we can talk about that later, or you can get in touch. Anyway, at the core of the Mara Hupara revival is the notion that this kai takitanga, or stewardship, which encourages Maoris to nurture, sustain, and safeguard not only traditional elements, cultural elements like games, but also the natural environments to provide the space, material, and inspiration for this culture. So it really is this connection between people, culture, nature, and games. And people, and specifically, is about generational environmentalism, or intergenerational environmentalism. And here's a wonderful proverb that it came about. These attributes are valued by our ancestors: power, strength, and sturdiness, the power of the legs, the strength of the hands, and the sturdiness of the hupara. So hupara is very important to body culture and to basically helping Maori people be strong and sturdy and powerful. So I'll finish off with a couple points. Traditional games can be valuable for developing this idea of ecological sensibilities that are increasingly recognized as a vital ingredient in advancing climate action. Oceanic nature games can help develop a better understanding of the relationship between nature and society in the production of knowledge. And I propose considering Indigenous traditional games in particular as a cultural interface whereby Indigenous knowledges and cultures interact with and disrupt Western worldviews. So again, these Western ideas of environmentalism are very different from Indigenous worldviews when it comes to nature. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Without further ado, belatedly, I will have to move on because we're running out of time. So I'll introduce our final speaker of the forum. So our final speaker is Jeroen Derkinderen. He is studying at the Universidad Andina Simon Bolivar. I hope I made that pronunciation correctly. And he's also a very important collaborator on the Greening Sport project that we are doing. So he will give a presentation today about Ecuadorean Andinismo, dialogues between the mountains and the Andinistas, 1964 to 1984. When you're ready, Jeroen.
Thank you very much. I'll share my screen. So there we go. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm in Quito at the moment. So as Dale said, I'll be talking about Ecuadorian Andinismo. So Andinismo is a word used here in the Andes in South America to describe mountaineering. It is very much connected to the word alpinismo, on alpinism, on which I will come back a little bit later. So I thought for this presentation to open up some questions on how the mountains were perceived historically here in the Andes in Ecuador, and how this relates to questions of the perception of the domestication of space. So that's why I thought it would be interesting to put the mountains more central than the Andinistas, than the human beings climbing these mountains. That made me think and have a reflection on two dynamics or two questions. So how did the Andes condition the Andinistas? So here I try to understand mountains as subjects and as actants. So as some sort of being that has an important place in the development of an activity, in this case, mountaineering, and also how the Andinistas shaped the Andes. So how did they intervene in these spaces, and how did they appropriate these spaces over time? So on the right-hand side, you can see a little drawing of one of the more iconic mountains from Ecuador, Mount Cotopaxi, which is very often compared to Japanese Mount Fuji because it has this very conic shape. It's a volcano. It's a fairly young volcano, so to say. And it was a common practice up until the 1990s, more or less, to make drawings of the routes one climbed, so known as topographies. Here we can see a route from, I think it's the 1970s, from a local club, from an archive of local mountaineering club. So maybe, since Ecuador is maybe not the most well-known place for mountaineering, in the central highlands, there's a space called the Sierra Centro y Norte, where there are many snow-capped volcanoes, such as Chimborazo, Cotopaxi, El Altar, and Los Ilinisas. And that's the area that concentrates most mountaineering. Also, till this day, it's actually fairly accessible. From Quito, it's a 4-hour drive to Chimborazo. So it is a mountain that is easily climbed, well, not easily, but it is climbed in a weekend. For this presentation, I will focus just on a little time period, so from the 60s to the 80s, because this is a period where most interventions were actually made. So the most mountain huts were built in this period. And also the activity had a very important change. So it changed in discourses and it became also more technical. So the quest was not only to climb a mountain, but also to climb a mountain in a more difficult route, over more difficult routes. And I think, yeah, this connects to who practiced the activity as well. At that point in time, there was a slight democratization, but it was mainly an urban activity. So for white male urban subjects. And so my sources for this investigation and for my doctoral project are mainly specialized magazines, club archives, interviews, photographic collections, and some newspapers to see the perception of the mountains. And this is maybe for those a little bit unfamiliar with the Ecuadorian highlands. You can see that most of the snow-capped volcanoes are centered in this area. And so you can see from Cayambe up until Chimborazo is maybe the most frequented area by mountaineers. For the highest volcanoes, except for Antisana, all of them have some sort of mountain huts. And most of them were built, all of them actually were built between 1964 and 1984. So just to clarify it a little bit. Also important to note is that the Andes have snow-capped volcanoes or mountain ranges, I would say, within the Andes with particular mountaineering activities, such as, for instance, in Peru, there's the Cordillera Blanca, close to a town called Huaraz, where there's also a lot of mountaineering activity. So the Andes are very long and very spread out, but there are only a couple of nodes, I would say, where mountaineering activity is very important. But Ecuador is one of those places where there's annually quite a lot of tourism, and historically this has been built up since the 1980s, more or less. So part of my research also delved into this literature. So mountains were very often seen as places of domestication, places of consumption, and also very often places in decline. So with glacial retreat and so on. So maybe the first two titles are very important for the Andes. So Doris Walter, a French anthropologist, made a study on how the Cordillera Blanca and the Peruvian Andes were domesticated. So there's a national park, and it was not only domesticated like in a very physical way, so to limit human and human activity in this mountain range, but also in words. So which stories were told about the Peruvian Andes, about this bit of the Peruvian Andes, that in some sort of way domesticated this space. And very related to this studies is the work of Mark Carey, where he studies how this particular bit of the Andes, so the Cordillera Blanca, was mapped in the 1930s up until the 1950s. And so what I think is interesting is, and yeah, the last title is kind of the book that inspired a little bit this question. So how do human beings shape the mountains, and how the mountains shape human beings? And I have a little bit of a problem with this idea of domestication, because I'm seeing in the Andes there are many ways of living with the mountains, and yeah, in some sort of way domesticating the mountains, but not necessarily in a harsh way. And I think to understand this, it's important to see a little bit the differences between the Andes and the Alps. And I'm now only talking about the Ecuadorian Andes. So obviously the scales are very different. So we're talking about mountains with very different altitude, at a different latitude as well. In Ecuador, we only have a dry season and a wet season. There's no four marked seasons, as is the case in the Alps or in the ranges of North America, for instance. And also the geographical dimensions are very different. And so this also, in some sort of way, repercutes in how the mountains are seen. So in the Andes, historically, the mountains were seen as apus, so like gods by indigenous peoples. And the valleys were often the fertile places where people could grow crops. While in the Alps, up until I think it is the 18th century, people believed dragons lived in these high mountainous spaces. So I think it is very different to see a space as a place where a god lives, in opposition to a barrier that separates basically the Italian peninsula and where dragons live in these high mountainous spaces. So, and this also translated in the scale of mass tourism development as well. So in the Alps, we have many interventions from the 19th century. So the building of cable cars, roads up until very high points, avalanche retaining walls, and a very large quantity of mountain huts, even in the most inaccessible spaces, such as there's like even emergency mountain huts, like the Valo hut on Mont Blanc, which is, I think, 4,500 meters high, surrounded by glaciers. And so part of my argument is that there are different ways of intervening in the mountains, and gives us a more nuanced perspective how human beings and nature can, in some sort of way, try to find equilibria to live together. And so this is where I think it is important to note how the Andes shaped the Andinistas. First of all, the word Andinismo was coined by an Ecuadorian mountaineer, Nicolas Martinez, in the early 20th century. And from that point onwards, he tried to give meaning to that word. So he said it is a sport, it is related to nature, and it is important for youth to practice Andinismo. So there's this dimension where he tried to give it meaning from the start on. And well, the word developed and gained traction all over South America, all over the Andes. By the 1930s, it was already used all through the mountain change. And so this shaped the Andinistas in the way that they were moving through specific territories. So the approaches, for instance, in comparison to the Alps, were much longer. The people they encountered were very different, because there's an important indigenous, there are indigenous communities around those mountains. And as I said, this cultural dimension was very important to to the shaping of the Andinistas. So very often when the Andinistas talk about mountains such as Chimborazo, the mountain here on top, they're talking about El Taita because he is the father in local mythology. He's one of the fathers here in local Quichua mythology. Maybe interesting, more anecdotically, Chimborazo had also a Japanese expedition in these years in 1961, with unfortunately a dramatic accident, which was very largely covered by the media. It was an expedition from the Waseda University from Tokyo. And one of the elements I think is also very important to note in this time from the 1960s to the 1980s is how the shape of the mountain, so the morphology, or the morphologic conditions, you could say, shape the Andinista. So it's very different to do a very long approach hike and do a long, arduous climb up Chimborazo, which is let's say some sort of, I would put it within brackets, maybe like a high mountaineering walk, while other mountains like El Altar, which is much more steep, as you can see, required a different practice, so more climbing related practice. So you can see this, as Carol said, a different embodied experience with the terrain. And here we can see that mountains in some sort of way are acting. So it obliges the Andinistas to move in very different ways, which I think is very important. So that is one of the elements that stood out for this period. It is also translated in learning circuits. So for a mountaineer from one of the main cities of the highlands, it was very different to learn mountaineering from Quito or Riobamba or Ambato, because they had other mountains close by, and that in some sort of way made them relate to their territory in a specific way. And in this period, we can see how mountaineers were relating in a different way with the mountains now. So from a relatively horizontal space to a more vertical one. So am I already on time, or do I have a couple of minutes more? I don't know when I started, actually.
But you can continue, please.
Okay. And so, yeah, this brings up this, like, one of the larger problems within the, let's say, from a sporting point of view, the north face of Obispo, which you can see is very steep and very vertical. So the relationship drastically changes from a relatively horizontal space to a more vertical space. And so how did the Andinistas in some sort of way conquer or domesticate these mountains? I think one of the more important points to note is that there were, in this period, the most mountain huts were built, especially on Chimborazo. They had like first a hut with, built from wood. But what is interesting, by the 1980s, partly due to climate change, the ancient normal route wasn't climbable anymore, and that's why they decided to build a different hut. So it's interesting to see that gradually over time, the normal routes on most mountains have changed, largely because of climate change, but also because of human activity in some sort of way. There's this interaction between the glacier that always goes higher up, and the mountaineers needing to seek new routes. There was also this moment where some religious symbols were placed on mountains, which were some sort of intervention and appropriation of the space. And in the 1970s, we can see also the creation of national park, which had quite a lot of different problems, but which, yeah, I will not go into today. And also one of the more important ways to appropriate these spaces is through language. So language that even in the 1950s was very common in Ecuador was the idea of conquering a virgin summit, language that came more from a British context from the 19th century. But in the 1950s and 60s, we can see these two narratives, a more patriotic and a more religious spiritual narrative, of ways to appropriate these natural spaces. And yeah, then there were like new practices like the carrying of flags, the chanting of the national anthem, and even there were a couple of masses celebrated up in these high mountainous spaces. This is one of the highest masses in the world at 5,800 meters. I think in 1958 is this mass, but the magazine was published later on. And so maybe in conclusion, I think, yeah, Andinismo is a way to see how the relationships between nature or the mountains and the climbers evolve. And these, the northern and central highlands, if you understand this as a historical space, we can see one diversity in Indian experiences, and I think it also opens up the question of what kind of domestication can we observe, can we study. And so more recent problems is also, yeah, the overuse of these natural spaces, which has led to erosion in many places. Notably, one of the mountains close to Kita has a very marked roots, but it has been really eroded over the last years, which is a mixture of obviously human presence, but also of the heavy rains of the last years, which made this problem quite a lot worse. And I leave you this beautiful image of the inauguration of one of the mountain huts of this period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeroen. So as I kind of mentioned, we are running a little bit over time, but if it's okay with the panelists, with the contributors, I'd like to just extend the session just a little bit longer so we can have a few questions. So if that's okay, can I ask, are there any questions to any of the presentations that we've heard today? Dave? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to put you all on the spot. I'm just listening to everybody. It's depressing, isn't it? Really, thinking about the climate change, the damage to the environment through leisure, CO2 emissions, sport. So I'm going to put you on the spot because I'm conscious of the time, and I'm going to give you 1 to 2 minutes each. And I'd like you to identify one single piece of action or initiative that would support environmental conservation to mitigate against this damage. Now, that's really difficult. I know it's a hard question, but because of the time. So what would it be? What would you say? So I don't know where you want to start, Dave, or who wants to start? Just 1 to 2 minutes.
Did everybody get Dave's question? Okay. Okay, Jeroen?
Yeah, it is a very complicated question. We discussed it in a discussion last year as well. And for mountaineering sport, there is no elegant solution, I would say. There's no easy solution. There are some models that, yeah, defend this more diffusionist idea, so that not all people should go to the same place, but try to spread it a little bit more out, which makes the impact a little bit larger, but maybe less acute in some spaces. As a historian, it's always, I think, difficult to answer questions from a present perspective. That's my minute.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Tom?
Well, Dave, my presentation wasn't that gloom and doom, was it? I'm trying to think of some of the stuff that I've been reading about when it comes to some of the Aboriginal worldviews on environmentalism. And this isn't necessarily an initiative because I wasn't really looking at initiatives. I guess my whole thing was an initiative. It's like develop ecological sensibilities. And that's kind of what everybody's saying too. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting is just this idea between Western approaches to environmentalism and Aboriginal approaches. And one of the interesting things that I came across is this idea of what is a wild place, right? So Western ideas of wild, untouched virgin land, right? We've never touched it. Whereas certain Aboriginal worldviews about it would be the fact that the land changes constantly and we accept it for what it is, right? And a wild place is actually a place that has been left alone so that, you know, tourists can come and view it, right? A wild place is a place that hasn't been tended to by people. in any matter, in any sort of form. So it's not an initiative, but it is something that I thought of in your question, and in relation to how we're degrading the environment through different outdoor activities. But that's a really Western idea of environmentalism and how to save the environment and keep it untouched, versus indigenous worldviews on that topic. So yeah, I didn't answer your question, but I like my answer. So.
I also can try to not answer to the question. If I'm a little bit cynic, what we can do now will be probably not the good things to do if we have in 2 or 3 decades, because we always change about our expectation and wish and what we consider to be important or to be the priority. So of course the most basic or the most important thing is to limit the frequentation of natural sites. So it could be to not allowed, to forbid everything, to limit to a certain number of users, but at the end it doesn't. I think it makes, for me, as not as a sport historian, but as an outdoor practitioner, I think it doesn't make sense to have some restrictions, some specific way that you don't have to make one step in the other side, and it doesn't make sense for outdoor activities as I understand them. So so of course the good thing is to limit the use and the capacity of the most attractive sites, and in the other way we will probably have more physical activity in different area, because there will be always people who want to discover other land with new way to discover them, and things are always changing, and there is the first thing we have to do today is not the same as we will have to do tomorrow, and we always have to think what is the most important today, and always think that we have to change and to adapt the rules in the next years or decades.
Carol?
Well, I kind of agree with Pierre, but I think there possibly needs to be some limitation on access, but that should be done in line with considered an evaluation perhaps of the economic impacts that might have on certain types of communities, and to see if those restrictions can somehow be balanced out, so that the communities who are now quite dependent on the economy can still be sustainable, even though those restrictions might be imposed. I don't see another way other than to. So just an example, if you think about the tennis tournament, Wimbledon, there are thousands of people every year who want to see the tennis tournament at Wimbledon. So they don't let everybody go. They limit the access and they ballot the tickets, so that people, so that the pressure, let's say, on the tournament is lifted. So it's a parallel,
Yeah. Aikoh sensei, anything?
Yeah, okay, so it's a bit difficult to answer your questions. But yeah, I appreciate all presenters' presentations. So I was very interested in all her presentations, and I have not considered much about historical perspective. So yeah, I appreciate Professor Ikeda having me. So yeah, that's very difficult to answer, to solve. The problem is very complex, and also the world is very rapidly changing environmentally and socially. And I think the most important thing is to keep records currently. So the monitoring and keeping records is very important because we have to recover and restore the old, and we have to decide which point is the turning point and which point was the turning point. And so, yeah, and recently I started a new research project is just compare the photographs taken the 100 years ago, because so our national park 19 years next year is Japanese national park, and I think the historical perspective is very important. That's my today's impression. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice of you.
Yeah, my opinion is make action by yourself first. That's what I'm thinking. So it's huge problem, and I talked about the carbon cycling and related to the global warming. Everyone knows that the globe is warming, but it seems the people who people think that it's not related to you. Actually, human beings create this problem, but because the problem is so big, it's hard to take the thing that is related to you. And also, I think people don't know what to do to tackle with this problem. So I think anyone who knows, who cares about this problem can make any actions, and that can influence the friends or family, maybe someone close to you, and they can spread the action to others. So that's what I think, and yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your question, Dave. I think it was a kind of a very apt question to kind of finish the discussion. So to close the session, I'd like to invite back Professor Keiko Ikeda to give some comments.
Keep this frame because everybody can see the participants inside here. And at first, I would like to say I'm sorry whether our not a good time management, so discussion time is reduced. But I feel it was really a great congress on the hill, and to borrow the space, the eco village in Inoue, and that is really related to our discussion, because now we can see Jeroen and Pierre-Olaf and Tom online, and Tom was as a speaker, then what is the difference last years? Tom was in Sapporo, and this year we have many on-site speakers here, and after the exercise and some traditional games, play provided by Dave, that was Dr. Dave, then my atmosphere is completely changed. That is linked to what Tom said, embodied, nature in the frame of play. So students will more understand what had happened. Then I'm thank you so much for all the participants here and also speakers. Then I don't want to, I can't and also summarize it, but I would say some thank you so much for the Takahiro Inoue and who are giving fundamental data, the monitoring data, and Aikoh also mentioned. So without that, and just that we are only thinking about the theory and historical context only, then we need to combine that data together with us. And also, I would say thank you so much for the Tetsuya, Aikoh, and also his presentation was so much linked to the Dr. Carroll, and he's giving the practical fees issue. That is the most annoying matters. Yeah, we have to confront what happened in the venue, in the practical field, plus very philosophical ideas. That was Carol also mentioned, what is a play. So if carrying capacity should be considered, and and what we can get, without the activity, that mountaineering, which would be well combined after I got their explanation. And Pierre-Olaf, thank you so much for the mention about what is an environment we need. That was also linked to my introductory comment in a long term history environment. We completely away from the animal or nature savageness, and we created the environment for human beings, but we were still need to involved in the nature. That is a issue. What is environment? After we accepted the AI robots and online we are doing now, but we need to combine it, how to look at the situation. That is a reality, how we can live with such a circumstance. So what is environment is a really philosophical question, I think. And Tom, thank you so much giving a lecture from Dublin. And I think you were here because I'm really happy to be here. And what you said is now, I think, conveyed in practice to the participants, Yeah, this is not a hoopala, but we enjoyed a lot. So students' cases completely different, and at the university, the Congress room. So thank you so much. And again, I would say thank you, everyone, and give us the unknown fact to us from the South America. And I loved the mythology in the Ecuador, but now noticed it was, and the circumstance, the problem is, shared. That is a bad aspect, But I want to keep your mythology there. But that is the global issues now. Everybody have to thinking about and in the common sphere, and also diversity. So I would say, and thank you so much for the joining. And maybe, and what is the conclusion is up to. I want to leave that to you all. And what I said is not the obsolete one. And but what we can do is disseminate the idea that a result. So we published last year the proceeding the book, and if it was an open access, not only the participant here on the other time, and we can use it to the everybody in the world. So please send us your summary. Speaker, 2-page, A4 size, and then not only the people here, we can share everything. Then that would be one of the outcome. So keep on thinking together. Thank you for joining here. Thank you so much, everybody. Okay. So there's it's closing time.
Thank you, everybody. Hopefully we will upload this to YouTube at some point next week and disseminate it across. So thank you all for joining. Speak to you soon.